Welcome to BitBlitz Horror, where we explore chilling tales that blur the line between nightmare and reality. In tonight's reading, we venture deep into the unforgiving jungle, following one man's discovery of ancient symbols and hidden passageways that offer more than mere mystery. Prepare to unravel secrets best left buried, and remember, once the door opens, there may be no turning back. I wouldn't be telling this story if I hadn't already come to terms, at least partially, with what I saw, and more importantly, with the thing I became. I remember the day so clearly. I had been in the rainforest for 3 weeks, studying population movements of a recently discovered amphibian species that supposedly had an almost supernatural ability to camouflage itself among the damp, rotting logs and thick underbrush. My name is Josh, and I was out there alone. Some people might question the wisdom in that, but solitude has always been oddly comforting to me. Or at least it was before I found the symbols. I set up camp on a high ridge that overlooked a river winding through the jungle. The water's steady roar lulled me to sleep most nights, though on a night like that one, when the humidity prickled my skin despite the evening breeze, it was harder to rest. I had a small tent, an aging laptop packed with as much battery power as I could carry, and a single table for dissecting leaf litter and collecting samples. The floor of the jungle below was riotous with life, the calls of birds at dawn, the midnight vibrato of insects, and the rustling presence of larger creatures I hadn't yet caught sight of. That morning, I set out with my usual gear, a notebook, a small hand lens for closer examination of flora and fauna, and a machete to clear the densest vines. The air smelled thick and wet, a fragrant blend of jasmine and decaying leaves. My boots sank slightly into the moist ground with each step, and a layer of sweat coated my forehead. Overhead, the canopy filtered the sunlight, painting the world in shades of green and gold. As usual, the creatures of the jungle dictated my path. I chose trails based on the frequency of calling frogs or where I might find footprints of mid-sized mammals. I was recording notes in the margin of my notebook when I noticed something peculiar near the eastern slope of a large rock outcrop. At first, I saw only creeping vines wrapping around boulders. But then an odd shape caught my eye. It was a series of lines, strangely geometric, carved into the rock's surface. Immediately, I closed my notebook and approached. From a distance, it looked like an abstract swirl, but as I drew nearer, I realized it was a labyrinth of overlapping shapes, circles, triangles, and lines branching outward like silent lightning bolts. I had never seen such carvings in this part of the rainforest before. Local rumors referred to ancient tribes that once inhabited the region, tribes that left behind cryptic petroglyphs, but nothing in my research suggested they had carved such symbols. Something about the shapes made me uncomfortable. They were too precise, almost modern. I brushed away a cluster of moss and lichen, revealing more of the design. It spanned nearly the entire face of the rock, maybe 5 or 6 feet high. My curiosity outweighed my unease, so I removed my glove on a whim and pressed my palm to the wavy lines incised into the surface. Instantly, a sensation of heat snaked through my hand, as if I'd touched a live wire. The symbol started to glow with a pulsating red light, throbbing in time with my heartbeat. Or more accurately, I realized, it was shaping my heartbeat to its own rhythm. I jerked my hand back. The glow persisted. Then I heard a grating sound, like stone grinding against stone, and slowly, part of the rock face slid aside, revealing a dark passageway descending into the heart of the outcrop. I stood there, mouth agape, as the thick stench of old air wafted up from the newly opened entrance. My head swam with questions. Who built this? Why would it respond to my touch and open now? I felt an inexplicable pull. Some might call it curiosity, but it was more akin to dread-laced compulsion. Despite every rational voice in my head telling me to call for backup, I stepped forward. It was, in hindsight, a grievous mistake. But I was a scientist. I had to see what was inside. The passage was narrow and steep. Built into the walls, I noticed faint carvings, the same style of symbols repeated over and over. They glowed a soft red that reminded me of smoldering embers, providing just enough light to see. The air turned colder as I descended. My breath fogged in front of my face, and a chill sweat formed on my temples. The deeper I went, the louder my heartbeat sounded in my ears. I paused to examine the etchings. Though they were intricately carved, the lines looked rushed, as if the artist had hammered them into the smooth stone with great urgency. There were depictions of strange half-human creatures with elongated limbs and multiple sets of eyes. I reached out to trace a line, feeling that electric hum under my fingertips again. My stomach twisted with an odd mixture of fear and fascination. Eventually, I reached a small chamber with a domed ceiling. The walls were slick, glistening with some sort of moisture, and the same glowing script spiraled across the surfaces. In the center of the room stood a pedestal about waist high. On it rested an oval stone, black as pitch. The stone's surface was polished, reflecting a faint red luminescence from the lines surrounding it. I approached slowly, each step echoing. A presence filled the chamber, though I was alone. That was my first direct glimpse of how potent the energy in that place was. The pedestal seemed to vibrate, a nearly imperceptible hum that resonated in my bones. I remembered reading about megalithic sites around the world where stones were rumored to hold energies beyond ordinary explanations, but nothing I'd studied prepared me for this direct, tangible sense of something alive in that environment. I found myself drawn to the black stone. The glow from the walls pulsed in sync with a deep throb inside my chest. Against my better judgment, I reached out and brushed the surface of the stone with my fingertips. It felt cold to the touch, yet it also felt like it was breathing. Suddenly, images flashed before my eyes. Vivid, disjointed images, the same monstrous figures I had seen in the carvings, each with ink-black eyes, each beckoning me forward. I saw the jungle from above, as though I was a giant looking down at a labyrinth of trees. I saw bones, countless bones, beneath the forest floor, interwoven with roots. My breath caught in my throat. Then the vision faded, and I nearly collapsed to my knees. I don't know how long I stayed there, kneeling on that cool, damp stone floor. It could have been minutes or hours. My sense of time completely abandoned me. With a shaky exhale, I regained some composure and forced myself to stand. I realized that lingering any longer might seal some dreadful fate. My instincts screamed at me to run. I staggered back up the passage. The climb felt steeper than before. My legs trembled, and my lungs burned. Part of me feared that the exit would seal, trapping me forever within that tomb-like place. But thankfully, daylight still filtered in at the top, and I staggered out into the oppressive jungle heat. The symbol on the rock glowed one final time, then went dark. The stone door sealed behind me with a deep, resonating thud. I stood there, my heart still pounding, trying to understand what had happened. Back at my campsite, I tried to function normally. I told myself I would not return to that place. But curiosity is a demon all its own. I had always prided myself on my logical mind, the ability to rely on science. Yet the compulsion to discover more about that bizarre subterranean chamber nagged at me incessantly. I had nightmares that night, journeys through black tunnels, glimpses of red, pulsing shapes, and the petrified faces of creatures I could barely name. When morning broke, I found that I couldn't eat. My body rejected the thought of food. Instead, I sat at my makeshift table, phone in hand, considering whether to call anyone for backup. The region was poorly mapped, and the nearest rangers or local authorities were days away, and if I told them about a glowing symbol that led to a hidden chamber, they would doubt my sanity. So I kept quiet and tried to continue my research. I took notes on amphibian sightings, measured the humidity levels, and collected soil samples. An entire day passed in this half-distracted state. At dusk, I hiked along the perimeter of my usual survey area. I caught the faint call of a rare frog species, the one I'd come here to document. The sound drew me off my normal trail, deeper into territory where the undergrowth thickened. Soon, the vines formed a near impenetrable curtain. I took out my machete and started hacking through them carefully. My mind drifted, replaying the scene of that subterranean chamber. Each swing of the blade felt heavier than the last. Suddenly, I noticed that the forest had gone silent. The frogs ceased their calls, the insects hushed, and the birds no longer cooed from the canopy. Even the wind seemed to die. A prickle of fear crawled up my spine. I stepped forward, and found myself standing before another rock face. It looked eerily similar in texture and coloration to the first one, although no symbol was visible. Vines covered most of the surface, so I pulled them away, hoping that I wouldn't actually find anything. But I was wrong. Beneath the leaves, etched in the stone, was another design, more complex and spiraling than the first. Against my better judgment, I pressed my hand to it. Despite the creeping terror, I could not help myself. This new symbol erupted with crimson radiance just as the other one had, pulsing in a slow, methodical beat. The ground quivered as if reacting to some deep tectonic shift. Then with a rumble, a second door slid open. A swirl of fetid air enveloped me, carrying the scent of old earth, decay, and something else altogether alien. I stumbled back, recalling the dread I had felt in the first chamber. Every cell in my body told me to turn around and run. Yet I could not deny the magnetic pull drawing me forward. Against all reason I entered. This tunnel was shorter, leading into a rectangular chamber. The walls bore more carvings, but these were violent, scenes depicting some ancient ritual involving figures kneeling, arms raised. Strange shapes hovered above them, reminiscent of predatory gods feasting on adoration or fear. In the center of this chamber sat a wide, flat stone table. Dark stains marred its surface, too deep in color to be moss. I approached slowly. A sensation of foreboding welled in my chest. Something like a cloth lay draped over the table's edge, though it was torn and frayed. I couldn't tell if it was originally ceremonial attire or something else. A set of markings indicated multiple palm prints in dark pigment, aligning in a pattern around the table's perimeter. Each hand outline had elongated fingers, more than any normal human hand should have. My head buzzed with questions. Who or what left these prints? Why here? Then I felt a shift in the air, as though charged with electricity. I spun around, expecting to see some figure lurking in the darkness. The carvings along the wall seemed to contort under the flickering glow, shapes twisting, lines bending. My pulse raced erratically. I realized that perhaps these places were connected. I recalled the black stone from the first chamber. Was there another artifact here? Some piece of that puzzle? In a moment of panic, I began scanning every inch of the chamber, dread fueling my search. But aside from the stained table, I found nothing resembling the black stone. As I turned to leave, the passage behind me slammed shut. Panic rose in my throat. I raced to the spot where the door had been, clawing at the stone, searching for any mechanism or hidden handle. My fingertips scraped over jagged edges, but the entrance was sealed. Deep, throbbing fear took hold. Was I trapped? Then I remembered how the other door had opened in response to my hand. Perhaps there was a symbol on the inside, capable of letting me out. The chamber walls were labyrinths of carvings, but my mind was too scattered to read them coherently. Desperate, I placed my hand on various patterns, hoping they would react. Nothing happened. The chamber remained silent and unyielding. I didn't know how much time passed, but eventually fatigue overcame my panic, and I sat down on the cold floor. The lines on the walls continued to faintly glow, providing an infernal twilight I couldn't escape. I fumbled in my pack for a flashlight, turned the beam on, and studied each carving meticulously. Finally, I spotted a hand-shaped indentation near the base of one wall. It was smaller than my own hand, with those elongated fingers. The shape instantly reminded me of the prints around the stone table. I placed my palm over it. A jolt of cold shot through me as the carved lines glowed bright. The stone door groaned, but did not fully open. Instead, a faint crack appeared, letting in a whisper of the jungle air. A second indentation glowed beside the first, requiring another hand. But there was only me in that chamber. For a moment, the dreadful thought crossed my mind: was I supposed to place both hands at once? Or did it require two separate individuals? And whose hands would those be? Out of sheer desperation, I contorted myself, pressing both hands against the indents simultaneously. At first, nothing happened. Then I felt a violent surge. The markings blazed with a searing heat, and my veins felt like molten lava. An agonizing strain coursed through my entire body. I gritted my teeth, refusing to let go. At last, the door trembled and slid open a fraction more. The air that rushed in was an indescribable relief. I wrenched myself free of the grips in the wall, stumbled out of the chamber, and collapsed in the clearing outside, gulping down sweet, humid air. Darkness had fallen. Crickets chirped hesitantly, and the faint rustle of leaves signaled the presence of nocturnal creatures. My limbs ached, but I forced myself to stand and return to my camp. The residual glow behind me faded, as though the chamber retreated back into quiescence, satisfied to have tested me. For the next few days, I tried to avoid that entire part of the jungle. I felt haunted by the knowledge that there might be more such doors, more secrets hidden in those depths. And the nightmares continued, amplifying in intensity. Strange symbols spun behind my closed eyelids each time I tried to rest. My dreams carried me to places where the sun never reached, where black stones hummed with inhuman resonance, and where chanting echoed endlessly. During my waking hours, I thought I heard faint calls, not from any known animal but from something deeper, older. I felt a pull to revisit the first chamber, to see if the black stone was still there. Several times I almost marched out, grabbing only my flashlight and a frantic desperation, ready to tear back that heavy stone door. Yet each time I hesitated, recalling the pain, the terror, and the dreadful sense of presences unseen. On the fourth night after finding the second chamber, the delirium overwhelmed me. My body sweltered with fever. I soaked through my cot, twisting and thrashing with nightmares. Everything took on a red haze. I heard whispering in an unknown language. I saw shapes, spindly and tall, standing just beyond my tent. Were they real, or hallucinations? One shape pressed a long-fingered hand against the tent wall, near my head, as though it knew me intimately. A sob escaped my throat, cold sweat dripping. When I mustered the courage to flick on my flashlight, the shape was gone. I realized I couldn't remain in the jungle in that condition. I decided, with trembling resolve, to break camp at daybreak and make my way back towards civilization. Yet morning came too soon, and the fever left me weak. As I folded my tent, I noticed a pattern of small footprints in the dirt outside. They were human-like, but with elongated digits. My heart hammered so violently that I had to sit down to stop from fainting. Terrified, I finished packing in frenzied haste, fumbling with the ropes and stakes. Then at midday, I heard an echoing roar, like rocks shifting. The ground shook, the trees swayed, and I stumbled. The shaking was far more intense than any normal quake I'd experienced. A thunderous crack rent the air from somewhere deeper in the forest. My flight instinct kicked in. I grabbed my gear and rushed toward the path that would lead me back to the closest ranger outpost. But in my haste, the entire landscape seemed to conspire against me. Vines tangled beneath my feet, roots snaked up to trip me, and my mind kept turning me around. Helplessly, I realized I was wandering off course. After a frantic hour, I paused to get my bearings. I studied the shape of the hills around me, the position of the sun. Something felt off. The forest itself felt changed, as if the quake or the presence beneath had rearranged the land. My compass spun uselessly, as though magnetized by some unseen force. Fear blossomed in my chest. I pressed on, hacking at the dense greenery, determined to push my way through. Then an unsettling hush fell over the jungle again. The hairs on my arms prickled. I halted. No creatures, no breeze, no rustling. A suffocating stillness. I advanced slowly. The undergrowth parted to reveal a clearing. In its center stood a vast stone archway draped in vines. My eyes widened. That had not been there on my way in. The earthquake must have dislodged the rock, revealing yet another entrance. I wanted to run in the opposite direction, but my body disobeyed me, drawn forward by that same dark compulsion. I approached the archway, stepping carefully among roots and stone debris. Underneath, the space curved down into a broad ramp. Carvings, once again, lined the walls, these older than the ones I'd seen before, more weathered and ornate. There were repeated motifs of elongated hands, bizarre animals, and symbols I had come to dread. The corridor was lit by a faint red glow climbing up from below. I swallowed my resignation and descended, driven by the madness of uncertain discovery. At the bottom lay an immense cavern, illuminated by veins of swirling crimson embedded in the stone. The sight was breathtaking, in a horrifying sense. Great pillars of rock rose from floor to ceiling. Shadowy alcoves lined the periphery, each containing a statue or carving of the monstrous figures from my visions. Some statues depicted these beings with open arms, as if welcoming me. In the center of the cavern stood a massive dais, and on that dais, I recognized the black stone, larger now, or perhaps it was the same one appearing far more sinister in that glowing deep. The stone writhed with an energy I could almost see, a faint shimmer distorting the air above it. My heart thundered as I realized I could hear a whispering, a chorus of hushed voices chanting in a language beyond my comprehension. I stepped forward, half enchanted, half revolted. Each inch I moved, the chanting grew louder in my skull. It felt like 1,000 minds were converging, channeling some ancient dread into me. By the time I reached the dais, the chanting had built into a deafening crescendo. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it did no good. The voices were inside me. Eyes squeezed shut, I felt tears stirring behind my lids. When I opened them again, I saw that the stone was glowing with a fierce intensity, beating like a heart. Something deep within me recognized that it was calling for me. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my legs wouldn't obey. With trembling arms, I reached out. Contact. My hand touched the stone's smooth surface. I instantly felt a roiling wave of cold quiver through my body. Those disjointed images returned, more vivid this time. The monstrous figures. Ancient gatherings in labyrinthine tunnels. Sacrificial altars. Humanoid shapes transformed by the presence of something indescribably old. I felt them beckon me to cross a threshold that should never be crossed. Then I realized the stone was feeding on me. My energy, my life. With each second, my limbs felt heavier. My vision blurred around the edges. Still, I could not pull away. My heartbeat synchronized with the thunderous pulse emanating from that black surface. A deep dread stung my mind as I realized that in opening the doors, I had awakened something best left undisturbed. And now it sought to merge with me, to use me as a vessel in this living world. A fragment of rational thought burst to life. Fighting the inexorable pull, I wrenched my hand away, staggering back. My chest burned, and a hot gush of fluid trickled from my nose, spattering the ground with tiny red droplets. The chanting retreated to a low murmur, a disappointed hiss in my mind. The black stone's glow dimmed, but I knew it was not defeated, merely waiting. I stumbled back into the tunnel, nearly crawling up the ramp in my desperation to get away. My vision swam. By the time I reached the surface, my muscles quivered with exhaustion. Dusk had arrived outside. Time felt meaningless in that realm of horrors. I collapsed against a tree trunk, but the jungle around me did not feel like a refuge. Everything pulsed with the memory of that subterranean presence. For hours I lay there, half delirious, cross-cut by horrifying dreams and fleeting moments of lucidity. Then came a realization that hit me with cold clarity. Each time I discovered a new symbol, it was as if the path to that hidden labyrinth extended. The quake, the clearing, the archway. Perhaps each step was an invitation. I had become an unwitting player in a ritual as old as the land itself, something that latched onto human curiosity as a mechanism to spread. A dreadful notion took shape. What if the ultimate purpose was to bring the essence of those ancient creatures back into the world through me? In the fleeting light of dawn, I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled, and a sense of nausea threatened to overtake me. But with a burst of determination, I lurched forward. I had to escape, to leave the forest behind. Each step I took felt like I was dragging my soul through a quagmire of nightmares. Yet I kept going, forging a path north based on my best guess of direction. Perhaps fate or sheer stubbornness carried me, but eventually I reached the banks of the wide river I had seen from my initial camp. Recognizing the curve of the water gave me a faint sense of hope. I followed the river downstream, praying it would lead me out. The next 2 days blurred together. Hunger gnawed at me, yet I couldn't stomach the thought of eating. I sipped from the river's edge, careful to boil water when I could. My dreams continued to be plagued by the presence I had awakened. Even awake, I felt the constant humming in my veins. But I pressed on, determined not to succumb. At last, I found the muddy track used by occasional logging trucks, my lifeline back to the nearest settlement. I collapsed with relief, letting out a tearful exhale. Once on this dirt road, I had a clearer route. In another day, I might find a small village, or at least a local who could help me return to civilization. Yet the final night I spent in the jungle was not peaceful. I built a small fire off to the side of the road, using almost all my remaining energy. When the moon rose, high and pale, I saw a faint shape lurking at the edge of the trees. Pale eyes, too far apart, stared unblinkingly. My heart rate spiked. A strangled cry escaped me as the figure retreated, impossibly tall and thin. The chanting resumed in my head, quietly but insistently. I squeezed my eyes shut, tried to focus on the crackling flames. The shape returned just before dawn, a silhouette gliding between the trunk shadows. It hummed a low note that sat uncomfortably between a moan and a hiss. Trembling, I grabbed for my machete, though I knew it would do little good against such an apparition. Yet it never fully approached. As the faint glow of morning touched the horizon, it vanished. In its place lay a small stone, black with a faint red swirl, placed about 24 yards from my fire. A final taunt, or perhaps a sign that the presence would never truly release me. I fled that cursed spot at first light, walking until my feet ached so badly I could barely continue. At midday, I emerged into a clearing where the jungle gave way to farmland. My vision wavered from exhaustion, but I managed to spot a rough path leading towards some distant huts. Relief warred with terror in my heart. I had escaped the labyrinth, but the nightmares persisted within me. Within a few hours, I found a local who took pity on my haggard condition and offered a ride to the nearest outpost town. I was half mad with fever by then, unable to articulate my story. They set me up with a cot in a rudimentary medical station. Days passed as I drifted in and out of consciousness. The local nurse suspected a tropical infection, maybe malaria or dengue. But I knew the fever was no mere illness. It was the brand of those ancient horrors, burning in my bloodstream. When I recovered enough to travel, I returned home quietly, refusing to talk about the details of my journey. My colleagues asked about my research. I told them I'd fallen ill and had to cut the trip short. People accepted that well enough. But privately, I knew I was forever tied to that place. I tried to bury it, tried to rationalize my experiences as delirium. But the marks on my hands never fully faded, two faint red lines that twined along my palms like foreign scripts. And at night, I still dream of those elongated shapes and the black stone that beckons me to return. I tried therapy, confiding only vague references to nightmares and fears. The therapist assured me it was a trauma response from a near-death experience in the wilderness. She encouraged me to face my fears through controlled exposure to my memories. If only she knew how dangerous that truly was. The presence is more than memory. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel that we never truly parted ways back in that cavern. It lurks in the recesses of my mind, feeding off my nightmares. Several months have passed now. My colleagues encourage me to resume fieldwork, to pick up where I left off. Everyone sees me as a passionate wildlife researcher, but I feel a deep, gnawing dread at the thought of returning to any rainforest. My nights are fitful, and my days are haunted by the knowledge that something old and malevolent has marked me. Sometimes I hear it calling in the back of my mind, a faint whisper in a language I cannot understand, and I wonder if it is summoning me to reopen the path, to complete the ritual that was left unfinished when I pulled away from the black stone. I have become an unwilling sentinel, stationed between two worlds, that of the known and that of the unspeakable. Each day, I fight the temptation to push further into my research, to decipher the runes that have etched themselves into my memories. My rational mind screams that to do so would invite horror into the daylight world, but the compulsion is there, an itch beneath my skin that refuses to fade. Occasionally, I catch faint glimpses in my peripheral vision, tall shapes drifting at the edge of my apartment hallway, or an elongated hand sliding out of sight behind a piece of furniture. I tell myself these are illusions, but my heart lurches with each fleeting image. The brand on my palms glows a dull red in low light, or perhaps I simply imagine it. Either way, I can't escape the sense that the presence is near, waiting. I've begun studying ancient mythologies, searching for references to subterranean gods or creatures that once walked the earth. I find cryptic fragments that speak of those who dwell below, rumored to feed on the life essence of mortals, forging a bridge between worlds as soon as a mortal is curious enough to let them in. A chill runs down my spine as I recall placing my hand on that first glowing symbol. Was it a test or a lure? Some nights, I question whether my role is to warn others, to keep them from succumbing to the same lure. But part of me suspects that the forest is cunning, that these hidden doorways remain sealed until the right person comes along. Someone with a mind open enough to sense them, but desperate enough to cross the threshold. I was that person, and now I carry the burden of knowledge. I've tried to destroy the few notes I recorded in that final week before my breakdown, but I can't bring myself to burn them all. A small voice in my head insists that I might need the information one day, or that maybe the presence demands I preserve these clues. My nights are long, broken by feverish visions of cryptic signs, subterranean altars, and a black stone at the center of it all, beating steadily like the heart of a colossal beast. Why am I sharing all this now? Because in the midst of my exhaustion, I feel something stirring again. At times, I hear noises in the walls of my apartment, scraping sounds in the ventilation ducts. I pull the covers over my head like a child. It's foolish, but I pray that it will keep me safe. Of course, it doesn't. In my sleep, they appear, chanting, shaping themselves out of the darkness. Their voices are an endless chorus of commands I can't interpret. I don't know which thought in my head is truly mine anymore. Their presence is so interwoven with my mind that I can't find where I end and they begin. I fear that the forest is summoning me back. Everywhere I turn, I see references to primal shrines, to half-buried rock faces. In my rational hours, I recognize the illusions, the coincidences. But the illusions keep piling up until they melt into a relentless reality. My chest tightens with the knowledge that perhaps I am meant to finish what was started, to open another door, or all of them, and let the presence fully claim me. I try to imagine returning to that spot, plunging once again into the hidden passages. Perhaps the entire labyrinth of tunnels is waiting. Perhaps in some deeper cavern lies the final seat of their power, the place where these tall shapes and black stones converge to awaken an even older force. That possibility is the worst of all, the idea that something infinitely ancient and hungry lurks below the rainforest floor, waiting for the right mortal puppet to swing open the gateway. In my waking nightmares, I see an entire world overrun by these half-glimpsed creatures, elongated limbs rising from the cracks in the earth. Humanity stands no chance. The transformation spreads like a disease, taking hold in the minds of those who are curious or despairing enough to respond to the call. I see the pillars in that vast cavern illuminated at last in full blinding crimson, heralding the arrival of a darkness beyond comprehension. So I write this in the solitude of my cramped apartment. My heart thunders with every keystroke. If someone finds this account, if they read these words, perhaps they will avoid the same mistakes I made. Yet I suspect I'm only fueling the curiosity that these forces prey upon. The rational part of me wants to end with a warning. Stay away from those symbols, never place your hand upon them, do not follow them into the uncharted recesses of the earth. But I know how curiosity can burn, how it can outmatch fear. My phone vibrates on the table. The screen displays an unknown caller, though it might just be a telemarketer or a misguided friend who changed their number. But in my current state, it feels like an omen, the presence reaching out to confirm that it hasn't left me. I sit there, my chest tight, letting it ring unanswered. That red glow behind my eyelids resurfaces, throbbing in time with each ring. A single question rattles through my panic. Is it calling me back? I'd like to believe that I can resist, that I can survive as an ordinary researcher who had one too many hallucinations in the jungle. But deep down, I know the truth. Something responded to my touch, awakening from an ancient slumber behind stone doors. It won't stop until I return. And with each passing night, the compulsion grows stronger. I fight it, but day by day I lose a small piece of myself, as though the presence is siphoning me from afar. I don't know how this ends. Perhaps I will vanish one day, driven by my nightmares to trek back into that green hell. Or perhaps the presence will erupt into our world on its own, tearing open every hidden chamber in unison. All I know is that I am changed forever, marked by the uncanny glow and the whispering promises that seep from below. My greatest fear is that one night, I will awaken in the darkness, already packing my gear, helpless to resist its call. And by then, it might be too late, so here I am, a man on the precipice of madness. My name is Josh. I am, or once was, a wildlife researcher. I searched for rare frogs in the rainforest and found something else entirely. Those doors in the jungle were not meant to be opened. Those symbols were not meant for human hands. Darkness lurks there, older than we can fathom, waiting with patient hunger. And if you, like me, ever come across such carvings in the deep places of the earth, I beg you, try to resist. Run if you can. Because once you place your hand against that sigil, there is no going back. They will find you. They will follow you. They will pulse in your dreams until you are theirs, body and soul. And then, in that final chamber beneath the stone, they will devour everything left of you and claim the rest for themselves.